All right, fellas, we should talk about. We got a lot to cover this week, but I would love to start maybe with this blog post that Vitalik wrote, which is low risk DeFi can be for Ethereum what search was for Google. So I'm going to summarize this post here, but basically the idea is he outlines this tension in the Ethereum community for a long time, which is a tension in between applications that bring in enough revenue to economically sustain the ecosystem and applications that satisfy the underlying goals that brought people into Ethereum. And historically, Vitalik talks about how he had viewed these two categories as being very disjointed, especially because a lot of the stuff around DeFi in the early days was, this is the word that he's used in the past. He doesn't use it in this sentence, is an Ouroboros, right? Which is there's not a lot of value being created. These are just, meme coins or NFTs and people are trading them. Yes, it's creating fees, but are we really, generating any value here? And he talks about how this framing has changed because, just kind of looking at the traction that low risk DeFi, kind of a lot of the borrow lend, basic trading type stuff that's happening is taking off, and how maybe something like some like political meme coins aren't particularly interesting, but a lot of what's happening, particularly on the RWA side of things, actually is starting to provide a lot of real world value, and that could power just drive enough fees to sustain Ethereum. That's my summary. You guys tell me about any nuance that I might have missed that you think could be really relevant or takeaways that you had, and yeah, let's unpack.
I think one maybe like take a step back perspective is let's just think about where Vitalik has come in terms of his perspective of Ethereum, which is he could barely even say the word DeFi like 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all going to be, Web3, and it was going to be the consumerization of the internet. And we're going to be able to have ownership finally of your own data and data sovereignty. And I mean, we're talking about like borrow lend as the killer feature. Like, so, just thinking about the context of where this narrative and conversation has come from is pretty astounding. So hats off to being able to have the mental plasticity to be able to change your perspective over time. But I do think that, he's hitting the nail on the head in terms of what's working and what's not right now. This is a conversation that we have internally within Framework quite a bit, which is what are the things that are working and what are the things that are not. And the things that are not working, it's pretty obvious, the consumerization. And what I mean by this specifically is more of like the chat or communications applications, like that's not working. Things like social media on chain, really not working. You're not going to be able to have a sustainable model if you don't have some sort of fundamental revenue generation.
Yeah.
And the only thing that is working, there are basically two sectors that have fundamental revenue generation. And one of them is, and some of them are better than others, but I will call them out. One of them is selling block space. And some of them are DeFi and financial primitives built on top of those base layers.
Mm-hmm.
Basically DeFi and L1s. And I would actually argue, and this is something we talked about this week inside these four walls, selling block space is a really tough business right now.
Tough business.
It's not scaling with the activity. And I think, building chains, like we said, or like we were just talking about, for throughput that was supposed to be filled with consumer applications, but the consumer apps aren't here, and DeFi apps just don't have the throughput. They don't have the needs that you would have with a chat app. And so it's just a different model, and security becomes important, which is one of the reasons why I think when you're moving in the direction of financialization, you don't need high throughput as much. And so that lends credence to Ethereum. And I think that this is the recognition that Vitalik is having. So then within DeFi, what are the things that are working and what are the things that are not? Well, it's interesting, but there's basically two formats that make money, legitimate, scalable money. One of them is trading and one of them is lending. And stable coins become sort of a wrapper, an application that packages up both of these activities. You could say Athena with the basis trade is really trading revenue, but it's wrapped in a token. You could say things like USDS with Sky is lending, but it's wrapped in a token. But I think those are kind of the two things that you can point to. The problem with, and where I think he's coming from, is what is the thing that has durable, sustainable value? And historically, at least, trading is based on volume. Trading revenues are based on volume. Volume is based on speculation. Speculation has positive and negative cycles associated with it, which makes it difficult to have that durable, sustainable perspective. Lending is something that's totally different. And if we're moving into a world where and lending becomes an evaluation of what are the different types of collateral that you can bring on chain to borrow against. And historically, it's only been ETH. And then it became sort of like wrapped BTC in ETH. And then it became other assets that are in Aave that you could borrow against. And we're starting to get further and further out into what you can actually borrow against. And even now, Sky has, I think, $1 billion of Janus Henderson AAA CLOs on chain through Centrifuge. So you've got real world assets on chain that you can borrow against, that are being borrowed against. And I think if you start to look at some of the SEC or CFTC guidelines or their programs, bringing more assets on chain probably is with an emphasis on using them as collateral assets first. That's my read. And I think he kind of hits the nail on the head. And a lot of people are calling this sort of like, this is, one of the most important pieces he's put out. I think time will tell, but it's definitely very aligned with the conversation that we're having internally.